بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا.
And the great privilege that you offer me to be able to speak with you this way. I wish I was able to see you and interact with you. But alhamdulillah, as long as you are safe and well, this is an enormous privilege for me. My name is Azza Karram, and I serve as the Secretary General of Religions for Peace. Religions for Peace is the world's largest multi-religious representative institution in the world. It is a testament to the desire of religious leaders in 1970 to come together in order to honor what their faiths call upon them to do, which is to serve one another and to try to save humankind from itself. The 1970s was the time when the nuclear apocalypse was a very real threat and looming danger. It was the time when governments, many governments, were not necessarily able to deliver on a basic social contract with their people to keep them safe and protected and to avoid any war. I am not talking about 2020 and 2021. I'm actually talking about the 1970s, which is when this Religions for Peace institution that I'm honored to serve was founded. That was 51 years ago to the date. Needless to say, the situation of governments today has not exactly improved dramatically. Indeed, multilateralism, which is that space in the moment when governments come together, the United Nations, the European Union, the African Union, multilateral mechanisms as we know them that were created precisely in order to ensure that governments do not go to war with one another, that they serve and safeguard the interests of their people and by implication, therefore, of all people. Multilateral mechanisms today are at their most threatened. And it is a deep irony that this happens at a time when human need is at its highest in our recorded history. You may think I am referring to COVID. In fact, I am referring to a number of things that COVID has added to as icing on a cake, but which have been serious challenges for so many of the institutions as we know them today. I am talking about governments, but I am also talking about trade and labor unions, civil society, human rights organizations. Institutions today are very threatened too. Perhaps because there's a recognition and an acknowledgement that what we have today in terms of institutions is not enough and is incapable of meeting the needs of so many at the highest moment of our need. Sisters and brothers, I am thinking of our environment, the very water we drink to live, the very land we need to eat. I am thinking of the air we need to breathe. At no moment in recorded human history has our mere survival as human beings on this planet, at no moment in recorded human history has the very survival of this planet been more at risk. We will not have enough water. We are today at a moment where, as a human community around the world, we do not have enough water to sustain us altogether. Our food supply chains are seriously problematic. In one part of the world, we overindulge. In many parts of the world, we are dying of hunger. Yes, our environment is very much damaged. Our environment needs us to work together to serve one another in order to safeguard the environment so that our children and our children's children, inshallah, will have a home to live in that is safe, will be able to find drinking water without much trouble that is safe, will be able to get food off the land that is safe. Our environment today needs us to serve one another better. Our environment, which was gifted to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not just gifted to us as Muslims, gifted to humanity. This environment, in order to serve Allah, we have to serve this environment to save this environment. And that's only one of our challenges. We are worried about the very basic sense of dignity that every human being is entitled to. Because in Islam, we know that God did not create some people better than others. In Islam, we are taught systematically that God created us all. We are not always taught that He loves us all. But we know, and we should know, that He loves His creations, even as He sees the flaws that we have. As the shepherds of this earth, as the stewards and shepherds, khalifas of this earth, we are obligated to save one another, to save the earth. Perhaps we cannot save our souls, but we are definitely obligated to save this earth. And we cannot do so without saving and serving one another. And if we start to distinguish between a Muslim and a Christian and a Hindu and a Buddhist and a person with no faith, and it is only the Muslim or the Christian or the Hindu or the Buddhist or the person with no faith who deserves Allah's will and love and benevolence and guidance, we will kill one another. Our Creator created all of us. We are shepherds of all creation. And in order for us to do so, we have to turn around and see who is around with us. Because even though we feel God inside us, His breath inside us, in our heart and closer than our jugular vein, and we breathe with Allah, even though we are like this, we are not alone. We are able to breathe because we coexist, because we live in the same planet together. So when we serve, as we must, to save, we must serve together. Our religion is under incredible attack. There are millions of our brothers and sisters in re-education camps. In 2021, there are over 2 million Muslims in re-education camps. Where are the voices that decry? Where are the efforts that can save, even if in name only? As the Prophet ﷺ advocated, even if in our hearts we can try to right a wrong as the minimum of our faith. In our hearts, where are the hearts that beat for those in camps? Where are the words of leaders, Muslim leaders, spoken in the name of those in camps? Where are the voices of our Muslim leaders, spoken to save this earth, this planet, the gift that God has stewarded us to serve? Where are our voices? And perhaps our voices as Muslims together, even if we could come all together, all the 1.5 billion Muslims around the world, even if we could all come together and speak as one voice. Do you know something? I wonder if that would be enough. Because the planet that sustains us, the pain, the vulnerabilities are not only Muslim. Even when we can come together as Muslims to act as one and love as one and have and practice our faith as one, even when we can do so, it would not be enough. We are obligated to serve Allah's other creatures, the two-legged, the four-legged, the 100-legged. We are obligated to serve creation. And creation is not just made for one religious community. It is not just made for the two-legged variety. It is made for all of us, for all this planet. This is one of the reasons why I sometimes wonder how we can afford, any of us, to say, no, we will only follow this word. We will ignore these other words. I presume God speaks to us all, but I may be wrong. But let's assume for a minute that God does speak to us all. In September of 2015, a very secular institution of all the world's secular institutions, called the United Nations, convened 193 governments. Its constituency, the UN is 193 governments, they were convened after a long process that started in 2010 to identify, find, research, analyze, etc., talk about our common human challenges, our common human needs. And surprisingly, they are the same, regardless of where we are. North, south, east, west, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish. They are the same things. Our planet applies to us all. We all live here. So what hurts the land, the air, the water, hurts us all in equal measure. The poverty, the lack of access to decent food, decent health, decent education, decent jobs and employment, all of this is not only hurting the majority, it's actually hurting all. Because, and this is the lesson that COVID had to teach us so many years later, because when one of us is injured, is in pain, is injured, actually all of us are. COVID is teaching us on a minute-by-minute, daily basis that when one person is infected, all are potentially infected. That when one household is infected, all are potentially infected. COVID, the blight of COVID, came to our moment of, let us not call it Jahiliyyah, let us just simply call it a moment where we seem to have forgotten that which unites us, our humanity, as creatures created by God. COVID has come to us as a blight to remind us that we are so interdependent on one another. In this moment I speak to you, there are over 70 million displaced people around the world. Think of it. 70 million, over 70 million displaced people around the world. They have no home to go to. They have no aspiration of shelter, one of the basic needs of dignity. They have very little aspiration of shelter. They have very little understanding of when they will get their next food, let alone employment and transportation and education. No, they are displaced. They have no home. 70 million, more than the population of some countries. The amount of challenges confronting humankind today should teach us one thing, if only one thing: how incredibly interdependent and interconnected we are. We cannot afford to assume that the divine will protect one and damn the other because of what they believe, because of how they look, because of their identity. Surely we cannot afford that in this time and age. So that's why in 2015, when the United Nations elaborated the so-called Sustainable Development Goals Agenda, people still wonder, SDGs, do we need SDGs? We have our national plans, action plans, our mosque, our church, our community, our this, our that. Yes. Why are the SDGs relevant? Why should the SDGs be relevant to us in our lives as Muslims? They're relevant because they have all our needs very clearly listed, and because all our governments actually signed on to them. All our governments are supposed to be held accountable to whether they can give us basic food, basic decency, basically. The Sustainable Development Goals Agenda was agreed to by 193 governments. It has 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Each one of those goals is something we need to live by. We need in order to live in dignity. And if we think that governments matter, because I assume we must understand that governments matter, they do. Some governments have many, many Muslims incarcerated. Many governments have many human beings incarcerated because of their belief. So governments do matter. If they don't matter because they give us an order to our lives, a system of services that we need to coexist, a system of laws and order that we need to follow, they matter because they can also hurt us. So governments matter. So when 193 governments agree to what it is that they will hold each other accountable to deliver to their citizens, that should matter. The Sustainable Development Goals Agenda gives us some signposts, some milestones that we need as nations, that we need as common tribes and peoples created by the Lord. I worked in the United Nations system for nearly 20 years. One of the areas of that work has been to open the hearts and minds of the secular institutions within the United Nations, to open their hearts and minds to the value of engaging with faith, of at least appreciating why faith matters to the lives of the majority of the world's humanity. It's interesting because the United Nations is 193 governments, because those who work in the United Nations come from all over the world, which is one of the most amazing strengths of this remarkable institution and its weakness. But let's focus on its strength for a second. This institution called the United Nations is, for good reasons, because it must be a secular institution. However, it, at some point in time, forgot that people have faith. Even if some governments don't, people have faith. So I spent 20 years working in that system to bring the awareness of why religions matter. And you know what's really interesting? I think I and the team of people I worked with across the United Nations system in something called the United Nations Interagency Task Force on Religion. What strikes me most is not so much what we managed to change inside the system, which was significant. But what strikes me and humbles me is how much we learned about our faiths and faith itself in that process. There are some very basic facts that I learned. I learned that not every single religious institution necessarily feels comfortable. I'm being very diplomatic here. Not every single religious institution necessarily feels comfortable collaborating with other religious institutions. Not only other religions, but other institutions from its own religion or professing the same religion. I realized that as we were so busy pointing fingers at governments, we probably should have looked at where that other finger was pointing. When you point a finger, it points here. We probably should have looked introspectively a little bit at our own religious organizations, religious institutions, religiously inspired groups. I realized that God's call, that He created us different in order for us to get to know one another, I realized that that is a very, very basic area of gap. It's a huge gap. We don't know one another. We are struggling to know ourselves. We are struggling to know our own religious community within our own families. We are struggling. We haven't necessarily learned how to work across our religious beliefs and religious traditions, but based in our religious values, we haven't necessarily yet developed the art of working together as people of faith, as peoples of different faiths. Our religious institutions have not necessarily refined the art of working together across our faith traditions. You will be happy to know, I hope, that Religions for Peace 50 years ago was very active in South Africa. That in fact, many of the religious leaders who were members of Religions for Peace, founders of Religions for Peace in South Africa, were very strong proponents of the anti-apartheid movements. That they co-led, co-engineered, sacrificed, and became members of the post-apartheid spaces. South Africa is one of the examples of a legacy of religious actors, religious institutions, religious non-governmental organizations coming together to work across their religious differences. But it seemed to have been much more effective when there was a common enemy. In that case, it was the apartheid system. I guess what I'm saying is that it's high time that South Africa begin to be the example again of how it is that religious institutions, religious organizations, and religious actors must work together. Let's begin with our environment. Let's begin with our earth, our land, our water, our buildings, how we put our garbage out, how we look after ourselves, how we keep our communities clean while not defiling the environment around us. Let's begin with those kinds of programs and projects that I know many of you are already heavily vested in. But I do think that we have no option going forward, especially as we anticipate that there will be more humanitarian crises confronting us in the years to come because we have damaged our environment. We are anticipating, unfortunately, more humanitarian crises like COVID. Some people go so far as to say that COVID is but the beginning. I sincerely hope they are wrong. But let us assume for a second that they may be right. If we are at the cusp of more crises that will impact every single household on this planet, then we really don't have the luxury of trying to distinguish between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, and a Sunnah and a Shia, and a Christian and a Buddhist. And truly, we don't have that luxury. And we should not commit that sin. Let's leave it to God to determine whom He will embrace and be merciful towards. But let us be merciful towards our understanding and our commitment and our love for the divine. And do so by looking into each other's eyes and understanding that our survival is joint. And that there's no way that only one will survive at the expense of the other. Because this planet is all of us. We owe our planet to ensure that it not just survives, but that it thrives. And it is in ensuring that we serve this goal together that we can actually make this a reality. When we work together, we realize the divine. We fulfill the function of ta'arafu, the demand for lita'arafu that God said to us in the Holy Quran. Ta'arafu doesn't just mean saying Assalamu alaikum, how do you do, hope you're well, goodbye. No. Lita'arafu means to serve one another, to ensure that we live together well, that we serve together well. Let us commit to doing that. Let us commit to overlooking the differences, because the differences can and do kill us. They most certainly can and do kill our very planet. Let us honor what Allah has asked of each of us, that we serve one another, not only because we are Muslims and not only Muslims, but we serve one another as human beings. This is the ultimate message of any divine. Any and all roads to the divine are built on this message of you live together, serve together, live properly together. And sometimes, in some faiths, there are those who will also emphasize that we live to love, that mercy is love and love is mercy. And God's mercy encompasses us all, so it behooves us to show mercy to one another. Thank you.
An interfaith prayer in the time of pandemic. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. In these tough times, we remind ourselves that though our doors may be closed, our hearts are more open than ever. We share a prayer from the Islamic tradition. We seek the protection with the glorious. We seek protection with the Lord of the unseen in the heavens. We place our reliance on the living who never dies. O God, push sickness away from us with your gentleness. O gentle one, for you are powerful over all things. Amen.